I were first proposed this event, we thought that we would get maybe a few people in a studio audience type of thing. I mean, in general, stuff is pretty niche. Glad to see so many folks turn out, and we really appreciate seeing you all here. Also, lots of folks from the YC community. So in general, this open source angle is a really good fit for YC companies aimed at developers. And the reason we focus on developers is like understanding how things work technically is really the basis of building a healthcare ready app. And we hope that some of the stuff that we show today has the potential to save you a ton of time. That's our real hope.
All right, Rashma, you should be good to share.
All right. So that is what we really hope for. See, so yeah, why are we here? Note my cool mid-journey photo with like and has a lot of hands. Yourself. But for the others, engineers really thrive on this large uninterrupted stretches of time to kind of code a mental model in your head. You think deeply. And if you put a meeting on an engineer's calendar, you often ruin their day. Unfortunately, we at the healthcare, IT community often do just the opposite. To get these integrations done, devs many hours of meetings with stakeholders. I've met devs who sit in meetings all day trying to navigate an integration. And I don't know, Alex, Josh, this is madness, right? Like huge waste of human capital, not to mention extremely expensive. So we're here with a plan. We believe that an application that's designed to be interop ready will be much faster and more streamlined to integrate. And we have gathered reference implementations and for how to write various integrations. And between an interop ready, base and reference implementations, we hope for like a better path. Obviously, the meetings won't to zero, but to really help with the general framing of the problems and navigating the issues. And MedPlum team and contributors and topology team are open sourcing our experience, are getting these integrations working, and we hope that you all will come on this journey here. I know Alex, Josh really experienced many years in the field doing these integrations, and open source is our tool. And I think so. That's why we're here, and understanding how things work. So, a brief overview. I think some folks were saying that mid literacy with FHIR. I'll just do a quick primer on common EHR interfaces. So let's start here from left to right. So due to the TEFCA mandate in the US, folks are US based, so that's useful to keep in mind. All the major platforms, EHR platforms, support a FHIR G10 interface. So this is like a FHIR API. And in general, they have three audiences: patient, provider, and system or backend system access. So yeah, that's kind of the high level. And I know it's a jargony mess to think about what is a FHIR interface, but let's visualize in our mind what's going on here. So think of an EHR think like Epic at UCSF. Think about it as represented as a bunch of FHIR resources, so JSON, a FHIR data store, and is that over HTTPS, and these are three different kinds of authentication: patient, provider, and system. You can get access into the data there, and the access has different. So patient access is just for a particular patient. Provider access has some different providers have multiple patients they can access, and system access is like a backend application that can read and write data. That's what that means. And then we talked about HL7 a little bit here. This is a legacy interface. Think of this as pipe delimited text that is produced on an eventer. So when a patient is admitted to a hospital, there's a little pipe delimited message that is produced. These are on-premise kind of integrations. This is not like a cloud HTTPS type of thing, but this is another kind of interface that is available. And I put some little code words here. There's more different types, but ADT is admissions, discharge, and transfer. diagnostic results and diagnostic reports and orders and results interface and SIU scheduling. So these are common ones that you'll see. And, you know, there's SFTP interfaces, proprietary ones, and messaging. These are also, you know, well seen in the wild. We won't cover these too much in depth with their, you'll see them around, and we have some open source implementations of them as well. So let's see. So yeah, that's the high. We're going to show source code and demos of these today. This is like a, you know, real live thing, not anything that's canned or stuff like that. And we have like a lot of materials. And I want to highlight one more aspect, which is also like hard to appreciate, but is a very powerful thing to think about. A lot of these, we're talking today about, you know, EHRs, which are on the right-hand side in this diagram, so right here. But in general, like these other systems, payers, insurance providers, a lot of system integrators, these are government systems. NAFSIS is like a death registry, and BCD or Center for Medicare and Medicaid Claims Data, lab interfaces. HIE have like similarly shaped interfaces. So if you have like a great literacy in how to do these type of integrations, it's more multi-purpose and has a lot of broader applicability. So that's something to think about in the scheme of your integrations. Great. Alex, Josh, am I missing anything, or should we move on to some demos?
We'll move on to some demos.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So gonna show a few quick demos here. First, a super simple one where we read a single patient from an Epic backend. So that, you know, there's a patient in Epic, you take a authenticate to the server, pull it all on out, print it to the console. That's it. The second one is process an ADT feed message. So that kind of message type, when you get it, process, handle it, great. Then the cool demo, which Josh and Alex, thank you for putting it together, is a patient FHIR app. So this, when you're authenticated, when you have PHR, personal health record, you know, authenticating to a Epic server, pulling the data back, putting a unified record into a single web application. It's a cool demo. So these are the three ones that we're going to show today. And just like back to our fun interface diagram, this with authentication, that's that PHR demo number 3. This system access, it'll be demo number 1. And this sample ADT feed will be demo number 2. So let's get going with it. So this demo is very short, but hopefully effective. So here's a Epic backend system connection. And 3 notable things here. So this is a server to server connection. So like, you know, there's no UI. It's not like requiring anyone to touch any credential, type in any credentials or anything like that. And what I'm going to show you today is this is a MedPlum bot. So this is the MedPlum tooling that powers a lot of the integrations. It authenticates to the external server using JOT. And you'll notice that, you know, back to our common EHR interfaces, you know, we talked a lot about the FHIR G10 and how every, you know, EHR to the mandate has that. MedPlum is an extension of the G10. So if you like program against MedPlum, it's similar, not exactly the same, to programming against Epic from the machine's perspective. And this is a kind of subtle but interesting point. To the machine, these look similar. So, well, I'll dive into an example. And I realize this is like a lot of information, so feel free to ask questions if needed. But okay, into the demo. I'll take a moment of bravery as I live. Hopefully, Epic server is a test environment. So this is a MedPlum bot. It is like, you can think of it like a Lambda, like a code that runs on an event-driven basis, and you can invoke it various ways. In this example, we're taking like a epic private key.pem file, Epic client ID. And these are the base URL and token URL of the Epic system you plan to connect to. And then this is the Epic client. So, set everything up, authenticate via JOT, construct your assertion, post to the endpoint, get your access token, then just read the resource for a single patient from the client. That's it. So really simple. There we go. We got it back. So this is a hello world Epic integration, server to server, headless connect. Alex has some great material on like how to kind of set up your dev environment and stuff like this later, but kind of hope that you'll take away from this that there's a FHIR interface, you can authenticate to it, you can do this server to server connection. So that's it. That was a really short demo. I think it was like 5 seconds. How much work is needed on the practice to get this to work? Yeah, so that's a good question. We'll cover that, Jamal. How much work on the practice? There's two kinds of work. There's like the technical work, and then there's the navigations process. So you got to think of it in two buckets, and we'll walk through some thoughts there. Integration working is the first step. So demo. This says demo 3, demo 2. HL7 handling. So 3 little things about this demo. Generally, this is the HL7 demo, so processing an HL7 event-driven kind of interface. HL7 messages are actually generated by many application types. EHR, tax, LIS, many systems have an HL7 interface that kind of produces events and has like that long-standing aspect. Now, these are generally like generated by a non-collision. So this isn't like HTTPS hit with the JOT type of thing. It is more of a on-premise, and you'll need to do some special work to connect to those systems. And MedPlum has an interface here. This is kind of the data flow that you would expect, like the legacy EHR would produce this. It would feed into a bot, invoke the Lambda like we showed, and do the processing. So here is my sample HL7 bot. This is like a sample message, ADT message. You can see it's typed limited text. And in this example, we're basically logging the message type to the console, so parsing out, what type of message it is, the name, medical record number. In this example, we're storing it if it's a new patient to our FHIR data store. We are able to access this demo. Do we need to be a MedPlum customer? It is in our open source repo. We'll absolutely make sure that you get the sample code. You can even run it from the command line. You don't need to be a customer. And I have all of the stuff ready for that, and we'll make sure to share. So, and also important here is that if you're connecting to an HL7 device, it kind of is expecting you to act a certain way. So that is also, and you see this HL7 as part of our MedPlum Core SDK is kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It's also open source. Feel free to poke around if you are. But here, I'll execute this as well. There we go. I produced this ACK, gone through this process. So that's pretty much how it works. Again, another very short demo. But this is of limited utility as a cloud application. But we have in early alpha the MedPlum, and that is a on-premise adapter that uses WebSockets to like send this data to the cloud. So we are looking for alpha partners for this. You can contact us if you're interested. But this agent talks MLLP, which is the protocol that these on-premise connectors, all these on-premise systems speak, and then it's translated to HTTPS and secure WebSockets so that it can hit the Lambda and be processed. So that's generally how that works. Yes. So that's, and there's some more kind of description of the workflow and stuff like that. Question in the chat. I'm thinking the MedPlum agent would only need it for HL7 since FHIR should be available. Yes, that's correct. So Jason asking about, can you, FHIR is generally accessible over HTTPS, and HL7 you need the connection because it's an on-premise system, not a cloud application. So, awesome. So those are the two simple questions. I'm just gonna stop sharing for a moment and look at the chat here. Is there a way to collect all the patient information from one customer? Leandro, do you mean like everything for a single patient or all the patients for that customer? All the patients. Generally, that is very restricted on the system. I mean, rarely seen it exposed. I don't know, Alex, if you have like another thought pattern.
Almost never.
Almost never. Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely exceptions and times where that will go exposed, especially if you analytics application. But that's where Reshma was alluding to. You know, you kind of got the business side of this discussion where you've got to negotiate all your data access agreements, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the technical side. So technically, in App Sandbox and Cerner Sandbox, you probably do it. In actual real world, it'll vary. Your mileage will definitely vary.
And before we move on to the really cool stuff, I will do a quick
we do one more interesting question.
Can one hook up Earth directly to MedPlum to send HL7 messages, or when the agent receive messages from Earth? Brian. So, you know, Mirth in general is not like cloud-enabled with all certs needed to send the HTTPS encrypted traffic. So you would ideally connect your Mirth as a MLLP device to the agent. Then, if there's some folks maybe do novel Mirth with like that because kind of cloudish. I have not seen that, but maybe it's possible. But directly from Mirth to send a Plum Cloud would not be compliant because of the authentication and the need for encryption, etc. The protocol. Let's see. So here's some also materials, basically videos of the same quick demos, and it includes links to the source code. And I think hopefully that is helpful. All right, so let's move on to stuff. Alex, why don't I do and can perhaps take it from here?
Sure. Actually be answering some of the questions that are coming in the chat about FHIR adoption and the Epic Sandbox to bring. But I'm here to just open and give you a little bit of background on the topic. So why should you as a developer care about integration? 70% of doctors and nurses think that integration, some doctors that I've talked to have complained that they've got to log into 4 or more systems when they start their day just to access all the different patient data they need. And, you know, if any of you have family members who have ever had a repeat blood test or imaging scan or something like that happen to you, then you probably know this agony of not being able to find your health data where it should be. So what Reshma was talking about was the 21st Century Cures Act, and this is an act in the US that actually mandates the use of the FHIR APIs. And this act went into play in December 2022, when now we have access to provider and APIs for data. And like I said, there are business agreements that need to be negotiated around those, but it's worth the fact that Epic has an open sandbox you can test in. Cerner does as well, and many of the certified EMRs have sandboxes that you can connect to. MedPlum, also a certified EMR, in case you were wondering.
For the shout there.
So there's a huge opportunity here for us to, as developers, connect to these systems in a way that was never really feasible before with older standards like HL7 version 2, which required things like an agent on-prem in order to make those connections. So again, opens up new opportunities for us to access different customers that might not have been available to companies that were operating in this space, because you can do better integrations, you can provide better experience for your existing customers, and you can stay on top of EMR updates more easily because, again, it's all handled in the cloud, much more simply, more modern architecture compared to the older legacy systems that we've used in the past. And it's also easier for practices, hospitals, clinics, etc., to maintain these connections because it's just a lot less work. There's way more automation in play, and it's simpler deployment for IT departments, and ultimately they end up with happier end users who don't have to log into 4 different systems just to get their work done. A single sign-on. So in our SMART-on-FHIR toolkit, which Reshma did link in the chat earlier, and we'll drop another link in again later, we do support connections to Epic and Cerner right now. And if you don't see the EMR that you need a connection to, and it is on that PHL O&C list, it's certified, then you can contact us. You can make a GitHub issue in our repo, or you could add it yourself and submit a PR. That's the beauty of open source technology, so feel free to go. And we'd love to support you on that. So Josh is going to demo now an example application using the Met where it connects to the patient API of Epic. And it would be very similar if you were connecting to the provider API, but it's going to be a really interesting learning experience for everybody. So I'll pass it on to Josh.
Alrighty, I will share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see now. All right. So thank you, Reshma and Alex, for the introductions. Just very quickly, I'm Josh Lieben. I'm the CTO of Topology Health. And what I'm going to show you today is how we took MedPlum's Fu Medical application that you can see here on screen, which is a demo application to show what the experience would be like for a patient accessing their medical records, specifically with MedPlum. And what we've done with it is that we integrated it with the Epic EMR sandbox, so we can see the patient records that come from MedPlum in line with the patient records that came from Epic, so a sort of one view of all of them together. So I'll show you what that process looks like and walk you through a little bit about how I did that, show you some of the code and the calls that go on underneath, a little bit of the OAuth. In terms of questions while I'm demoing, please feel in the chat or on the Discord. Alex and Reshma will answer the questions that they can answer in time, and anything more technical I can get to after the demo. So without further ado, I'll start it. So with the Fu Medical application open, I'm going to log into Fu Medical. I have an account at the ready, and what this will do is it will connect me to MedPlum sample EMR. So you can see my name here, hold some patient data by default into the health records. I'll point out what this says here in a second. So we'll give this a second for the results to load in, and then I'll show you a few of the results that came in. So here we got some vitals coming in, some lab results. There we go. So they're coming directly from the MedPlum EMR. This is some data that's being loaded for me as the patient. So you can see here we have one lab result. We have a couple of Medicare, some blood pressure that came from earlier this month, and various other results that all came in that are loaded in for the account for this. I can show you a little bit under the hood because I am going to connect to end. But before that, I just want to show a little bit what's going on under the hood here with the network calls to show you that these results are MedPlum and it isn't just me pasting them into the UI of the hood. So we can see some result values from diagnostic report, medication observation. These are resource types. These are FHIR resource types. And these endpoints are defined as a FHIR R4 over here. So an example of some of the responses that we got once they loaded in, here we go. Here we go. So one of these medication requests that came in, let's find a good one here. So we got quite a few observations in here. We can see inside this observation, we see the code blood pressure. So that's one of the blood pressure response getting in here that are loaded down here. So this is, I'm mainly just showing this to show you that these results came from requests that went to the MedPlum API that were authenticated when I logged into the Foo Medical account. I've shown you that, and remember we have one lab result here. What I'm going to do is integrate Epic into this. So this is some of the code that we injected in. I know a little bit about how this works and what we've done here as I'm doing it. So what this is going to do is it's connecting and redirecting to my chart, which is Epic's login page. This would look different if it was for, say, a practitioner at a clinic, but in this case, we're doing it from the patient-facing perspective. I have Camilla's test patient account. We're going to load her in. That this is a test patient that's coming from Epic's test data, their sandbox. So I'm going to sign in here to authenticate, as I would as a patient. I need to make sure that I am sure, yes, I am sure that I want to share all this information with the Foo Medical app. I'll allow access, and once I've done that, it will redirect from Epic's auth back to Foo Medical here that the Epic integration is. To be clear, this authentication flow is one of the flows that's available as part of FHIR, and it is all using OAuth 2, and specifically Epic's the identity provider in this situation. So what I logged into that second time around, this login I just did, was to Sandbox as a patient user. And of course, down the line, what we'd want to make it one login complete, but this is to show you how we can show the records all at the same time together. So now that we've integrated with Epic, I'll show you the health records. You can see we have some more results. What I've done is I've tagged the results that came from Epic in the lab results. So this is sort of to show that in line with the results that we got from MedPlum as part of our EMR, we see all the Epic results here. So this is a lab result. We got a new medication, and we also have some new values for not body temperature, but we do have some for blood pressure. Here you go. So you can see some of these results are scaled differently because they're different EMR, but we're still able to show them in line in Web UI here. And to prove to you that I'm not doing any kind of UI trickery and just clicking a button and then loading a file, I'll show you a few of the network calls that came from Epic. So you can see these are the MedPlum ones that came through. If I keep scrolling down here, we can see a few that came from Epic. So this is the authentication endpoint that was called when I clicked on Integrate Epic. And here we can see a long diagnostic report for the MedPlum endpoint. We're also getting diagnostic report for Epic's FHIR endpoint here for the diagnostic report. This is Camilla's patient here, and we can see that the results that came through in here are in fact what we wanted them to be. So this one's the hemoglobin A1C. That was the second one that we're seeing over here. And then we have all of the results that came from there as well. So this is kind of showcasing what it would look like, or how it could look like, and how easy it can be to integrate Epic's EMR with the SMART-on-FHIR library. That's the name of our library I'm going to show you in a second, to let you add this to web apps for integration. So having shown that, let me show you a little bit of the code that went underneath adding this in. It's all written in TypeScript. So similar to JavaScript here. I'm not going to go into too much nitty-gritty, but I do want to show because I know some people will be interested in seeing that. So let me switch over to VS Code over here. I'm running this locally on my own. So the Foo Medical you were seeing was running, I'm not sure if you saw, on my local host. So when I clicked that button that was over here that said connect, actually you can't see that anymore. So this button over here thing was that this start standalone launch function was being called. And what this was essentially running this redirect page to this URL. This is Epic's endpoint. So that was when I was redirected to that path login page. And then upon login, a token is passed back to the browser. And then this little function here, which is always trying to see if the Epic connection is there, and that will only turn green once it's accepted. It reads from the browser the token information and then creates what we call an EMR client. This is part of our SMART-on-FHIR library, which I will show you in a second. We have it on GitHub open sourced. Very quickly under the hood for this, this create EMR, where is it? Create our client does some checks for what kind of launch is being gone on. In this case, we did it what's standalone launch, and that means that the web app was running independently of being pre-connected to the EMR and sends the auth request through that redirect that I was showing you before. So this creates a FHIR client, and this FHIR client is a JavaScript library that a lot of web apps are using it under the hood of our library, and it does those requests to the Epic auth endpoint to get back that in that token to build it. And then this function here runs and creates what we call a FHIR client using the JOT. And that FHIR client is essentially an object wrapper that lets you make requests to Epic's EMR. Requests like I want to get a resource, or I want to post a new resource, like an observation or diagnostic report, like the things I was showing you before. So with that shown, I want to show you a bit of our documentation that walks you through how you would add this and implement this yourself. So let me switch over to that really quickly. A little bit of promotion. This is our company webpage here, Topology Health. That's too hard to remember. On our developers tab here, we explain what SMART-on-FHIR is. So of course the original name is, and it lets you do these integrations that I was showing you on the web browser. So I showed you a little bit of the code underneath that allowed for that smart launch. So that was the button I was able to click to get it to launch. And you saw the network calls for the resources that were being got as well. I didn't show posting a resource. I have a prepared demo for that, but we do have pretty solid documentation here about what that could look like. And I know a lot of people have asked us and are interested in, well, what does I want to post new data back to the EMR, even in use case that's allowed and enabled. So using that FHIR client that I had just described before, you can create a new resource. And in this case, the example is a document reference, which is one common example of a resource type that a clinician might want to post. It's information about document reference information about a patient. What this object would look like, I have an example of it down here below. This is all available online at topology.health. You can review this later as well. This uses the document reference type. It's one of FHIR's standard resource types. And this is all you would need to add into it. Generally, a document what the document reference looks like. This is what gets written at the end. So I will, the whole point at the beginning is to show you how small you need to make it to be able to send it off. And then all this information is pulled from the context that's loaded into the browser already. Finally, after you've written a document reference, this is all the code you would need to pull back that reference. You wanted to double check and make sure that what you're getting back from the EMR is in fact what you posted. So this is an example of what that would look like. You would make a request for that ID of the document reference that you got from the response. It would assign an ID for you, reference it later. And then a binary attachment reference is given back to you. So the way that Epic EMR stores document references is as binary files. So you would get that reference ID binary back, and then the user is letting you log to the console what the attachment that came from that reference would look like. And this attachment would contain of exactly the document reference that we posted at the very beginning. It would contain the information contained in here, the coding and the text and the content as well. So this data here. I know I breezed through that a little bit quickly, but again, if you go to topology.health, we have this documentation for your reference. And as well, I can lead you to our GitHub page. So Topology Health SMART-on-FHIR, that's the name of our library. We have this posted now. It's available. It's open source. You can use it today. It's always in flux and in progress as we add new integrations into it. We invite you, we welcome you to check it out, try using it. Let us know if there's any issues with it, that don't see that you'd like to see. Anything you'd like added to the README to make it clearer, we make it as clear as possible how we've built our library to make it as easy as integrations with Epic. And also we've added Cerner recently. We think about adding more, as Alex showed you on this before. how to install, what the Smart launch looks like, the Smart client, that's the client I talked to you about for making requests, is in fact the type of launch that I demoed for you today here. And that's our read over there.
The really comprehensive. Gosh, love it.
We did our best. I, as I'm sure many of you are developers as well, it always irritates me to go to a page, lots of code in it, and README has basically nothing in it, so I don't even know where to start. So I tried to think if I would want to see if I was load. So I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. That's pretty much it for what I wanted to show you guys for the demo. So I'm happy to open the floor to questions here. I can go over it in a little bit more detail if you want, a little bit of the underpinning code, answer some more general questions about OAuth process, or more questions about our library. I open the floor to ask questions if they're interested.
So Alex, I think he had a little bit of material also on the provider side. We don't have a demo app for the provider experience, but I was wondering if you thought this would kind of share that, Alex.
Sure. Yeah. Since there were questions about it, I will share just a little bit about what the process looks like in terms of how to get connected through the sandbox. So once you've used SMART-on-FHIR and Plum to actually get connected to the EMR sandbox, you'll have to do some testing in the sandbox validated by Epic or by Cerner or whatever EMR you're connecting to, MedPlum even. And then you'll do it again by the hospital, and then your app can be deployed. This is a typical process. This is a very high-level view of that process. There's a lot to happen in here, but this is what you're looking at for a provider app. For a patient app, it looks pretty similar, but there are some differences. And I would generally say that the process is a little less complicated. So we're happy to also answer any questions about this or anything that Josh just showed as well.
And one more thing, providers, you know, that app that Josh demoed is kind of from the patient perspective, but providers also have in their EHR like that same Epic Connect kind of button, or it's actually they're not connecting to Epic. It's more like it would be like launch other app. So they have the analysis tooling, and if you have kind of a FHIR native application, it can be useful in that provider context as well. But Aziz, go. What's your question?
Hi, hey Reshma, and great presentation, everyone. I had a quick question on the HL7 part. Seems like, at least from everything you guys talked about today, it might be a slightly more outdated technologies. Most of the EMRs sounds like have FHIR APIs. Where exactly is the use for like connecting via the HL7 systems?
So it's a good question. It's very nuanced. So I would say that, like, you know, hospital systems are a big machine. They have like a lot of workflows and requests and stuff like that. Generally, sometimes they're not equipped to do driven workflows there. Like when a new event happens, you get kind of a push notification. So I would say that is one of the most common use cases for the legacy interfaces like HL7. I'd say ordering and results, or a patient admitted to the hospital, or changes in the schedule, like that of event-driven real time is not well supported by FHIR in all I see in practice in the field. And so, you know, having a Swiss Army knife of tools to get that's kind of the spirit of the multiple interface. And you'll also encounter like lots of proprietary interfaces too. And that's kind of one of the inspirations behind the bot framework.
Makes sense. And then, sorry. Just on the authentication side for the patient that you showed, is that the authenticate is to have their MyChart or whatever EMR specific credentials? Because I imagine sometimes that might be hard for patients handy or like even remember, and if it's been a while since they were last, or is that enough for them to authenticate?
So this is an early rollout, but there are like national ID providers. I think Kantara or something is one, and Clear, which are rolling out as like providers that support authentication at the patient level across multiple platforms. Early days on that, and today, you know, the from your EHR or also payer credentials have a similar workflow. I don't know if any of the FlexPA folks are here, but they work on that from that direction.
Yeah, and if I can add to that as well, this is something we're looking at and working on, building in the patient authentication into the existing web app. So you saw how I logged into Fu Medical, and then I also had to log into Epic. Ideally, something like the web app integration would have it so that you authorize the EMR in advance when you do like a Google login to authenticate to other services, so that the patient only needs to do that once, and then it's stored on the other end. And this is something that could be done in conjunction with the web app, which would definitely make the user experience better for the patient, where they don't have to always log in directly the same way. There are ways to limit that repeated over and over again, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Right. There's a few in the chat. I'm just going to read them out loud. Patient list for those at the clinic and hospital. Build it through event-driven workflows. Good question. I think that, generally providers are sensitive to having their patient list be queried. So I think sensitivity about both on the business side that you need to discuss at a provider basis. Certainly, we do see a lot of folks on the patient engagement side hook up with the SIU, which is the scheduling event feed via HL7 to, on an event-driven basis, get the new list of appointments that are happening on a given day and when people show up and that type of thing. And, that's very closely linked to the actual traffic that's happening in the clinic. So the thought there, I'm not sure that really helps. Other questions?
We just got a new one in the chat. Can a provider with one EMR pass access to demographic on behalf of a patient they have access to in another EMR that has a BAA with them avoiding the need for the patient to log in?
Good
yes, that's a really good question. So in the US, and for those of you who don't know, I don't think Josh and I have mentioned we're actually from Canada. We just do a lot of work in the US. So in the US, yes, that is the point of the 21st Century Cures Act. That is one of them aiming to solve. In terms of how that's done, there are now a lot of what are called health information exchanges, which are networks of different providers and vendors who've gotten together to share their data across their networks, their health networks.
I think we have some folks in the audience. I don't know if Titan want to talk about this as well, but there's also that workflow of referrals, and we have some stuff on our blog about it. I will post in the chat. I am also going to hit the source code.
Sure, and I'll just scroll back through the chat. We had some really good questions from P- and some other. P- asked if you're making a patient or practitioner app, does your app need to be approved by each system you have a contract with, or are there endpoints that you just access? And again, in the US, for the patient side of things, usually you just need your patient. Your patient has to log in through your app with their credentials. However, in the US, for provider access, you'll need some kind of contract. And Brian asks, is the MedPlum agent going to be open source as well?
It is open source, and you can erase from the releases page. It's an
Just
alpha, so caveat.
Somewhat off topic, but if any of you have any with the $ export endpoint, would love to hear about the caveats and risks here. Something Alex been export all of the patient data. How does this exactly get restricted from the bulk $ export? Or is there anything that more rare that hospitals will let you use it? That's a great question, Jason. Josh, do you wanna kick that one off?
I think actually you could probably speak to this a bit more in terms of because there is a bureaucracy involved in this.
Mainly a bureaucratic problem, I would say. This is a really good question because it actually does get quite political in terms of what data you're allowed to access and what are your business agreements between your entities. But also, for example, in Epic's documentation, they say that you should not export more than 1,000 patients at a time. Their emergency department could easily have 1,000 patients a day. So, those are the kinds of, and a lot of what we've shown you today is going to really vary depending on your use case, whether you're working in a clinic, whether you're accessing a patient API, a provider API, or if you're working in a giant hospital. Those are going to be different to navigate. So yeah, you have to keep that in mind and make sure you're applying it appropriately to those different use cases.
I do think I can get into the provide a little bit with regarding this use case. I mean, they carry a huge amount of liability, especially the big systems. If they do something wrong, they will be sued. So they are very careful. With regards to navigating the process, we recommend trying to build trust with them. Like if you make your SMART-on-FHIR app and you kind of show responsible use, and work with them over time, you can build up to a more high fidelity integration versus asking for a bulk fire day one. And that's kind of one of the goals of our toolkit and discussion today. If you build this kind of very FHIR native app with the right adapters, you can progressively upgrade your implementation. I see that as being a lot more effective and hopefully would help both parties feel that sense of alignment.
Yeah, and one thing we found, just to build on that, Reshma, is that once you do a demo with the provider that you're working with, their EMR's sandbox, usually they're a little bit more open to getting conversation started. So you've got that first layer of hesitancy solved. Like you can prove that I can connect to Epic and I can get data and I can do it securely. Aziz asked a really interesting meta question. I know we only have 2 minutes
I can tackle
left.
this one.
Sure.
I can do my best to make it quick. Get the question. I totally understand it. And there's a couple of different prongs to this. First of all, just because these APIs are available doesn't mean that they're ubiquitous by any stretch. Not every hospital is using it. And because the Cures Act is still relatively new, not everyone even knows that this is possible or even available to begin with. So it's not even that people are avoiding it. It's that people don't know. And that's part of why we're doing webinars like this, is to showcase that they are available. And the second prong to this is that the APIs are great in that they give you their data back, but the way the FHIR is built is such there's flexibility, is that one hospital or information about any kind of health information about the patient or about the encounter, slightly different nuanced ways between different clinics and different departments. You're not necessarily guaranteed that encounters I will get all information, the same information I expect to get, since every clinic has their own version of implementation of it. So there's always some reconciliation that needs to happen. So for those two big reasons, that's where the interop problem comes in.
Totally, Josh. To give a kind of concrete, interesting example, I have worked on implementation where they trained a model based on observations in facility 1, and they're like, why doesn't it generalize to 2? Because they can't see the data because they're just transferring over the code. And when I went and looked in there, they're tagged with a different ontology and code system. So yeah, it's not going to generalize, right? So there is, the medical kind of data schema, data model it's not simple. It's got a richness and a lot of interpretation to get applied. So it's a work in progress. Though I think there has been a lot of progress, and we have a reason to be optimistic about the future. So here I'm about to call this a time. Alex, Josh, and I will stick around for a few minutes if folks are interested. Thank you so much for coming to our talk, and please feel free to continue the fun in the Discord if you are up for it. And we're here to help and be of service, so please reach out to us. We'd love to have a community feel, and if anyone wants to open source some integrations, yay. This is fun, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
I think on the last topic of conversation, one hilarious thing we've run into is that in Canada, people literally don't believe us that we can connect to Epic API. We're like, no, but your hospital purchased it. We know we can do it.
That may explain my as part of my demo going into the network logs. I know for myself, because we've been asked these questions, to prove it didn't in fact come from somewhere else, because it looks so simple on screen to show that. Preemptively defensive because of that disbelief we've gotten in the past. Yeah.
People assume that it's fake all the time.
Yeah, or they're like, oh, can't that possibly be this simple or straightforward? It can be. And that's the thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if Jason's still on the call, but he has to follow
I see
up
him.
on the bulk thing. Okay, yeah. How is it they restrict you from using the bulk export endpoint mechanistically, given that it's part of FHIR? Or is your point that they'll block your app from using it, and more that they'll just never install if you tell them you're going to export during the contracting process? Yeah, so Jason, that's a really good question. During the contracting process, you'll lay out what you're allowed to have access to in terms of the APIs and the data elements within the resources that you're pulling from those APIs. And honestly, Epic or Cerner or any EMR will give you a very restricted scope that only covers what's in that agreement, typically. So you probably won't have access. And if you go beyond that access, it'll be considered a breach. And then you and the health system will both be in very hot water.
Yeah, and to add to that, the API spec, while it will do what it do as it's mandated, every EMR is at their own whim in terms of had business rules to their sandbox. Mm-hmm. So they can decide to limit you to a certain number of requests or the amount of data that can be retrieved at once. Just because the API spec says that it's possible doesn't mean that the EMR is necessarily going to implement it that way, or they'll add their own business rules to it. So they can limit it at another level on top of that. Yeah.
There are no restrictions for patient access, though, correct? Like as part of the Cures Act, the patient doesn't have to do any further agreement beyond just having been part of a provider system to get access to all their data.
Yeah,
yeah.
But there are restrictions on what data the patient can put back into the record.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so for example, if a provider makes a mistake on one of the conditions that you have as a patient, you often can't update that yourself. You have to get the provider to change that in your record for you.
Makes sense. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Jason's asked another, does that mean in practice you're making a separate app in Epic for each provider so that you can negotiate different scopes with each provider? Or does Epic give providers a way to add additional scope restrictions on top of your app when they install it? Typically, when you install your app or when you connect your app to Epic and are in their app marketplace, then you'll just have those scopes. So I've not actually seen anybody do that in practice where they change the kinds of scopes. But it'd be interesting to find out, Jason.
So Jason, we see kind of the reverse where people have a one MedPlum kind of installation and then they make multiple apps just working off the same data store for different use cases, as they kind of graduate up. So that's a different type of implementation, but I think and then you can add features to your app but it's the same underlying technical infrastructure.
Yeah, to elaborate a little bit on the technical, at least from the Epic standpoint, and I think this is true also for most of the major EMRs, they assign you a client ID, and that client ID is what enables you to authenticate to the EMR, and the scopes are aligned with that client ID. So to have two different clients, one app that has different access to the EMR than the other, because you don't necessarily want this two different departments within the same clinic to have the same access to the same data per se. So sometimes that's something that's wanted and needed. And generally having the limited scopes you need, whatever data you need, preferable per app. So that's the kind of thing that sometimes is the case as well.
Yeah, and that'll also be part of your privacy and security that you'll probably have to do as part of deploying the app as well.
All right, I think we should probably do a wrap. But thanks so much for joining. We are going to take this chat transcript and make a little FAQ out of it, and then we're going to put all the materials in the channel in the Discord. So please, if you have more questions or thoughts, we really welcome that, and like to go on this journey with you all. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Great to
guys,
have
a
you
lot.
all join us.